Good day, warriors. This is Mr. Armstrong. I hope you guys are all staying safe at home, and I hope you guys are taking some time to enjoy some of the open mic performances. Thank Miss Faye for putting all of this together. At the last open mic, I read a little bit from a novel that I've been working on, and I thought that today I would expand on that a little bit. I'm going to reread that prologue again, and then I'm going to also read the first chapter that I've written. And if you'll notice, you're not staring at me. I think that staring at me is fairly boring. So instead, I have got a selection of photographs that I have taken over the years as the background. And those photographs, there's like a dozen or so, should go through, and as I'm reading, they will change. There's no rhyme or reason to them. I just thought they were nice to look at. So here we go. They left one tree. Prologue. The final appeal failed. Protesters left the sidewalks and made the long trek back into the city, abandoning their signs and banners when they got the news. The wind carried most of their garbage into the nearby woods, depositing it all just inside the tree line. None of the local residents bothered to clean it up. Instead, they opened their windows, letting in the sounds of the frogs and the birds and trees and of the woods one last time, just as they had for centuries. Late into the night, after everything else went silent, a breeze still carried through the trees. The heavy flap of cottonwoods, the shimmer of maples and elms, and the quiet rustle of the lonely grove of oaks lent notes to the final performance. Eventually that too died down, leaving nothing but silent silhouettes standing against the moonlight. Night sky inevitably gave way, with a slow dimness of gray filtering through the east. A single robin filled the cool morning air, and every resident's eyes were puffy, red, and spent. Jack Beauregard Wilson, 6 years old, fell asleep the night before, not realizing how his small realm was about to change. His whole world was this forest, running right up into his backyard. He lived in these woods, exploring them on the ancient dirt paths crisscrossing the hundreds of acres. Well, maybe he hadn't investigated them all by himself, but together with his mom or his dad, he had walked nearly all of them. Every night after dinner, Jack explored them again in his own young mind, running through the forest, weaving stories, and hearing the birds speak to him. He climbed the branches of the tallest trees and peered out over the expanse, something his parents would never let him do when they all went out together. Everywhere he went, he told people of his adventures in the woods, and people listened, nodding, and the older folks who looked like his great-grandparents would always smile in a sad, distant way that confused Jack. They had the faraway smile when he talked about the beehives and the brown leaves and the caterpillars that he would let crawl over his skin because they tickled and felt funny. "You were a very lucky boy," the old woman at the vertical farm always said to him at the end of the weekly retelling of his stories. "Thank you," Jack said, unsure of why he was lucky, but wanting to be polite all the same. "Would you come and see my forest some day?" "Your forest? Oh my. Now I must come to see this forest that belongs to a boy. And what have you named your forest? What do you call it when you enter?" And at this Jack was quiet, for he had no answer. Never before had he thought the forest needed a name. He reached for his father's hand and gave it a squeeze. The ancient woman laughed again, deep crow's feet lining her eyes. Leaning down, she met Jack as she clasped her hands. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just remember the forests having names long ago, when I was your age, and there was more than just one left. And I thought yours might have a name, too. It's quite all right if it doesn't." At this point, Jack's father finished paying for the day's groceries and gave his thanks as they left the Vertical Farm's lobby and headed home. All the way back, Jack thought of what he could name his forest. That evening at dinner, Jack's parents opened the windows and the family ate in peace, each alone with their thoughts as the sounds from behind the backyard found their way into their home. Jack had a name for his forest. He decided he'd tell his parents in the morning. As Jack's mom and dad put him to bed, he noticed each had tears drying down their faces, although they smiled as they told him they loved him. Together they held hands as they walked out of Jack's room, leaving the window open for him. By the time Jack woke the next morning, the work was almost complete. He'd slept clear through the dawn, and hearing a loud crash, finally awoke with a start and looked out his window to the noise that roused him. He screamed. His mother came rushing in, heedlessly knocking stuffed animals out of her way. She held him as he continued to scream and flail as his world crashed down outside his window, one tree at a time. The foresters cut through centuries of wood and generations of memories, felling in haphazard fashion the cottonwoods, the maples, the elms, and all the rest. At last there was one solitary oak left standing, one with a small blue and white birdhouse hung on a lower branch. Jack had built it for Mother's Day a month ago. A lagging forester, seeing the house, unhooked it and gently tossed it into Jack's backyard. Then he looked around. Seeing the lone tree remaining, he powered down his chainsaw and walked away. As he left, he stepped over all of Jack's laughter, memories, and joy. Chapter 1. 25 years later. Jack found himself running through the forest again, as he had so often in the past. Barefoot, the evening air cooled his face even as the ground radiated heat from the day's sunlight. They were laughing as they ran, holding hands and letting the well-worn paths lead them where they may. No birds called out, no insects swarmed above, and there was no noise from beyond the forest's borders. Neither the shimmering leaves nor the occasional stream uttered a sound. The soft footsteps of 4 feet and the light laughter of her voice were all that Jack heard. These woods were timeless. He still knew every path and every turn, and the years changed nothing. Arame's hand fit inside Jack's only slightly, but both were lined with the beginnings of time. Every moment passed in an hour, every hour an age. Occasionally they would stop and remark silently, words unneeded. Jack felt his mind move to its standstill, clearing all other clouds from his thoughts. As he looked up through the silent spinning leaves, he saw the setting sun and stared into it, seeing the deep reds, purples, and oranges. It spoke to him. Jack, Jack, wake up. We overslept. We've got to go, or we'll never make the shuttle. Come on, Jack. And like that, the forest winked out. The light went from late reds to the bright yellows of mid-morning, and Jack's mind squeaked back to reality. Oh, crap. Betty, what time is it? 9:15. Come on. We've got to get going. The shuttle. The trip. Now. 5 more minutes. I'll be ready, I promise. Happy anniversary. He leaned over and gave her cheek a peck, his mind beginning to register all the things that he had to do in the next 45 minutes. Jack's dream faded back into the ether of his mind with the unbidden promise of a sequel. That realization brought Jack out of his sleepy haze more than the hot shower he stepped into or the hotter coffee Betty laid out for him as he walked, half naked and dripping, across their condo's floor. Jack looked out the balcony window and surveyed the day. You know, when we have kids someday, you'll have to put on more than a towel when you leave the bathroom. What, can't I do whatever I want, whenever I want? Jack said with a wry smile in one corner of his mouth. No, it's a cruel world. For instance, did you know that no matter how long you stare at that huge lake, the shuttle is still leaving in 30 minutes, with or without us? I wish you could hear the lake, too. Instead, if I slide this open, you know what we'd hear? Tires, humming inducers, the dull buzz of 50 million shuttles charging, 500,000 rooftop windmills drowning at any hope of hearing a single bird. Peace, quiet, and a gentle breeze. Why can't we have all three at once? Remind me why we live in Chicago? Jack cracked the sliding door open a little, letting the noise creep in. Because, Mr. Sunshine, this is where all the fun stuff happens. It's your academia. Everything on North America revolves around this place. Where else would we live? Betty's clipped reply caught Jack off guard, and he moved very slowly while considering his response. He stared past the balcony, not daring to turn his head, and sipped coffee as he watched orbital cars crawl up the city's star ladder in the distance, its black ribbons stretching endlessly upward into space. The ancient city sprawled out before him. How did I wind up here? Hello, Jack. Hey, I'm over here, Betty said, breaking her silence. Were you going to say anything at all? I heard you, Jack replied quickly. Still without a firm answer in his mind, but not wanting to press his luck delaying any longer, he fired from the hip. We could always move west. Her empty coffee mug hit the countertop with such force that Jack feared for instance it would shatter, delaying their departure and inflaming things even more. The stoneware miraculously held, although somewhere in Jack's mind he doubted it could take a second hit like that and survive. "I'm not moving west." "Are you crazy? There's nothing but ruins out there. Science outposts, wayward towns. God only knows what sorts of wastelands populate that vastness. What is wrong with you? What would even possess you to consider something so stupid?" Even after 6 years, I haven't learned to keep my mouth shut, Jack thought to himself. Where would we live? What would I do? How could we even think about raising kids out there? Betty continued on, oblivious to the closed expression on her husband's face. The dull background of city life emanating in from the balcony became nothing against her voice, and Jack closed his eyes right after shutting the balcony door. For half a moment he heard wind, leaves, and rustling. Bare earth pushed against his toes, and he pictured a smile. And then he opened his eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." It was an idle thought, nothing more. "But it's not all ruins and the apocalypse out there like you think it is. I went to school out there, don't forget." "How could I possibly forget? Your entire study is draped with holography crap. I walk in there and it's like I've magically moved myself out to the middle of nowhere. It's great, isn't it?" Jack quietly replied, hoping to steer his wife back to the land of reason. "It's different, I'll grant you that. Just don't go expecting me to set foot out there. Ever." "Shuttle leaves when? 10?" Jack asked. "Yes. How close are you to being ready?" "I'm so glad we packed last night. You're never ready for anything." 10 minutes. I'll be ready to walk out the door in 10 minutes. Whatever." True to form, Jack spent the time drying and dressing, throwing his toothbrush into his bag once he was all done. He stole quickly into his study and grabbed a small gray cube, no bigger than the coffee mug he had been holding earlier. Quietly adding it to his bag, he left his tidied retreat, refilled the coffee for the trip, and walked out with his wife. The shuttle left in 10 minutes. "You know we've got to take the express now, right?" Betty said as they walked quickly down the hallway. "Oh, crap. I hate the express." Jack furrowed his brow and for an instant wondered what would happen if they missed the shuttle. Not wanting to experience a repeat blast from earlier, he screwed himself up for the impending ordeal. "Oh, it's fine, you big sissy. Honestly, I have never understood why you don't like the express." "Just full of compliments today, aren't you?" Jack replied. Betty shot him a glare as they rounded the corner and were confronted by two massive sets of doors. She waved her hand in front of the set to the right, motioning that they intended to go down. Jack stood there beside his wife, palms sweaty, tapping a foot against the inside of his shoe with increasing speed. His tapping matched the vibrations he felt emanating from the doors before them, until at last the elevator car arrived and the doors parted. The elevator car looked remarkably unchanged from elevator cars of past centuries, with a few differences. Whereas before the elevator car would have been completely empty, the one in front of them now had two banks of seats against its far wall. Additionally, large white bins occupied the space in 3 of the 4 corners. The car's walls all had pleasant projections of the city, giving the illusion that the walls were windows, allowing the riders to look outside before getting off. Even the elevator doors maintained the illusion, with barely a seam visible from the inside. Jack and Betty quickly strapped their suitcases into the bins, closing and latching the bin covers and making sure the green light on top lit up brightly to show the luggage was secure. The 4th corner of the car had no bin, but neither did it have the familiar rows of buttons a traveler from centuries past might expect. Instead, a 4th white cube, smaller and shorter in stature than the storage bins, stood sentinel, with 10 slots arranged in 2 rows of 5, mimicking the seating arrangement for the 10 black leather chairs against the back wall. "You did remember your ID, right?" Betty asked Jack, as he reached into his front pocket. "No, I figured I'd just hang on real tight," he said as he fished out his ID. "Grab a seat. I'll put them in." As Betty grabbed her husband's ID, along with her own, she took the 2 gumstick-sized slivers of encoded metal and placed them into the 2 rightmost slots in the top row. "I call window," Betty exclaimed, as the armrest silently unfolded, and a lap bar rotated up from the floor. "I'll have my eyes closed anyhow." Jack quickly sat down and pulled the lap bar down over his waist until the cylinder's glowing end changed from red to green. The armrests folded back down into position as Betty mirrored the procedure in the seat next to him. Finally, after strapping themselves and their belongings, everything glowed green. They had 6 minutes until the shuttle left. "I told you we'd have enough time. Nothing to it. Jack turned to look at his wife, her brown shoulder-length hair obscuring all of her face. Only the rounded edge of a nose peeked through. The joys of being a Wilson, right? 400 stories up, a home most people would kill for, and a husband who would rather be on the ground, scratching through rocks, and who knows what else. Let's just get to the shuttle. What's this car's name again? Before Betty could answer, a firm British voice filled the car, replying everywhere and nowhere. My name is Alfred, sir. Betty beat her husband to the reply. Alfred, good morning. We need express to sub-level 3, please. Yes, of course, Mrs. Wilson. Will anyone else be joining you today? No, Alfred. Just the two of us. Thank you. Departure in 10 seconds. I see everything is already secured. Betty finally turned and looked at her husband, who's already had his eyes closed and was busy white-knuckling the ends of the armrests. Always the drama queen, she mused to herself, smiling as she looked back towards the city, admiring the enormity of the skyrise towers stretching to the horizon in 3 directions, while giant turbines spun silently over the surface of the great inland lake behind her. She tuned back into Alfred's voice as his countdown drew to a finish. 4, 3, 2, 1, release. And that is the end of Chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to email me with any comments you might like to have. And if I don't see you again before the end of the school year, I hope you have a wonderful summer. And I hope to see a lot of you guys back here in the fall. To all the seniors and everyone else moving on, best of luck. Until next time.